Hello, everyone. I hope you're all great today. You're happy and you're excited about what we are going to talk about today. Today, we're going to talk about popular romance, a genre which I believe you have been very familiar with. You have, in fact, read popular romance novels for last semester, and I'm really sure you have watched popular romance movies, or in movies, we usually call it a romantic comedy. Today, first of all, we will be talking about the history of popular romance, or to be exact, it's just the historical timeline of popular romance. From today's meeting, what I hope you will gain is knowing what popular romance has been and is now. Okay, you will be learning about the previous forms of popular romance, the forms of popular romance in the past, and what popular romance is like now. All right, first of all, let me start with showing you an image, of course. But no, I'm going to talk about the fact that popular romance is actually a very popular genre. In fact, it is the most popular of all popular literature genres. However, it is the least seriously taken by people. People consider popular romance mostly as entertainment, as tear jerkers, as a way to give yourself some fantasy, some imagination, and eventually some wish fulfillment. As I propose over here, the primary function of popular romance is giving some wish fulfillment. It is the main characteristic of popular romance. And today, it is always related to love, romantic relationship. However, in the past, it hasn't always been like that. Now, we will go through the historical timeline of previous manifestations of the romance and how it now becomes what we know as popular romance or modern romance. Okay, um, let us now see what it was like the first time. And you will be amazed to know that in the ancient time, what people considered romance is not necessarily about love relationship, but it's about narratives about people conquering distant lands and becoming kings. Or in a more sophisticated language, it's martial narratives, narratives about people who are military, people who take up arms to conquer lands and to go to wars and so on. Yeah, of course, there is love element there, but it is nowhere near as being the dominant element of romance. The most famous one, which I believe you have heard of, is the romance of Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great that we know now is actually narrated to us in a romance, in a story. Some people would say it's legend. Many people argue that it is somewhere between facts and legends. So no one is really sure as to who Alexander the Great was. What we know now is from narrations in epics, in romance. The romance of Alexander the Great was from Greece, of course. He's from Macedonia. But then it went to all parts of the world, to Africa, such as in Egypt. And now we have a city in Egypt called Alexandria. And then Alexander the Great, went to Iran or Persia. In Persia, he conquered one of their shahs or one of their kings and became the emperor himself. And Alexander the Great eventually got into the local narratives of the Iranian people, becoming what we know as Skandar. Skandar is the Iranian name of, or Persian name of Alexander the Great. In the Arabic speaking nations, uh, Alexander is known as Iskandar. The story about Alexander gets into the Quran, but not uh, mentioned like in person as Alexander or Iskandar. But uh, interpreters of the Quran believe that what the verse called Kafi talks about here is Alexander the Great. Okay. Now we also find Alexander the Great in Malay literature, including local Indonesian literature. In Malay, we know Iskandar Zulkarnain, Hikayat Iskandar Zulkarnain, or in Sunda, there's also one translation of the Romance of Alexander. So this is the first manifestation of romance. It's a martial narrative about people going to wars, conquering nations. That's the first one. So it's not really about the romantic relationship. But then we found another manifestation of romance in the Middle Ages. It's a story about knights going from one castle to another, conquering monsters, saving damsels, saving princesses. That's in the Middle Ages. We also find this chivalric romance in many epics, many poems, and also novels in Spain. Chivalric here means the sense of knighthood in which somebody would give all they have, give all their best to do good deeds, like saving princesses, saving nations, or killing dragons, and so on. So chivalric romance is the second manifestation of romance that we know of in history. And some examples would be Troilus and Cressida. This is by Chaucer, Geoffrey Chaucer. This story is about, yeah, Troilus and Cressida, two people who are in love but cannot really become one because of their warring nations. The two nations where they are from are battling each other. And in Spain, during the 1500 or 16th century, there was a boom of stories about knights going around the villages and towns to conquer monsters, dragons, and saving people. That was in the 16th century. You know this as the picaresque novels. And in the 17th century, early 17th century, there was a critique to this tradition called this Don Quixote Men from La Mancha. We know this as a critique to to the the what captive to the tradition of romance during the 16th century. In Don Quixote de la Mancha, what we have is an old man who is so fascinated by romance novels and eventually sees himself as a knight who has to go through small towns to save women. And in the small towns, he feels that he sees monsters and he kills the monsters or the giants, while in fact, what he kills is just windmills. And the man next to him is his what? His sidekick. He is not really a king, but the old man promises him, the sidekick, that when they are successful in his journey, he will give him an island. Okay, so that's Don Quixote de la Mancha, a critique to the uh, Romance traditions in Spain. Next, that's in the Middle Ages. Middle Ages means the time after the fall of the Roman Empire, before the Enlightenment. So it's somewhere about the 6th century to the what 15th or 17th, 16th century. Next, in the 19th century, we start to have Romance works which we can associate as, romance as we know it now, related to love, romantic relationship, and domestic conflicts. Many works in the 19th century revolved around getting a spouse for your daughter, or getting a nice husband for your beloved children. And we can find stories like that in, for example, uh, Sense and Sensibilities, Pride and Prejudice, Wuthering Heights, and many other romance novels from the 19th century. However, now, today, when we see these titles, we see them as classics, as uh, literary fiction. They are considered great because they delved into the spirit of mankind and what people at the time considered dear to them. While during its era, these novels were like what we know today as popular romance. So from here, I wanted to emphasize that popular genre or popular romance or popular literature is not really an innate characteristic. It is constructed or influenced by many other things, from commercial considerations to statuses consideration. Now, for Pride and Prejudice, Wuthering Heights, and Sense and Sensibility, at that time, they were considered popular romance, but today we consider them as classics. So the status of these works is now different. And this is also one of the reasons why, in my opinion, it is not fair to consider the divisions of popular literature and literary fiction as two hierarchical things. It's not it's not fair to see one as higher or more precious than the others. It's just a matter of um, preference and uh, how we use them. Okay, that's from the 19th century. Now, here we are in the 20th century. In the first decades of the 20th century, we started seeing the mass production of formula novels, or novels that start with point A and ends with point B. And the next episode, we will see that point B becomes point A again, and then it goes to point B. I know it might be confusing, but what I mean to say here is that there is a formula to novels mass produced in the early decades of the 20th century. For example, it starts with the restlessness of the main character. The main character wants to have a man as her lover. However, there are so many obstacles. And then, however, eventually at the end of the story, they get together. That's the first installment, the first episode. In the next episode, what we find is this couple, which have become together after going through obstacles in life, eventually find problems, and the problems become serious. There is a conflict, but at the end, they get together again. So that's how they end the story. They are happy in their condition now. In the third installment, in the third episode, the same problem comes again, and so on. So that's what we call as formula novels. And in the early decades of the 20th century, formula novels became mass produced and became very popular. And the conflicts or the themes are mostly about romantic love, romantic relationship, and domestic conflicts, the continuation of the 19th century tradition. And later on in the 20th century, this tradition has become stronger, but the conflicts have now evolved. In later 20th century novels, we no longer see the female characters as wishing only to be courted by a man, but they have become more and more active and they have stronger agency in the relationship. They become the determinants of the relationship. However, the themes are mostly about what people believe, what people suppose as women's concerns: love, desire, imagination, fantasy. These are what the later 20th century novels uh, have in their stories. And then we will have these stories: The Forbidden Beach, popular romance from the one on the right here, popular romance. It's um, from around mid 20th century, and this one, Paired to You, is an even later popular romance from a late 20th century or even early 21st century. In Indonesia, we have a lot of popular romance works in the 80s and 90s. These are magazines that I think I had the chance to read when I was in the middle school or elementary school, even. They had wonderful love stories, stories that make you want to read and never stop until the end of the short stories. So these were the high time in popular romance in Indonesia. Before later on, during the early 2000, we started, or late to 20th century in Indonesia, we started seeing Islamic love stories like in Anida and many other magazines. Okay, I think that's the brief historical timeline of the genre. I hope it gives you a description and a picture of what popular romance is and what it has become. My emphasis is that the term romance hasn't always been related to love. It was once related to wars and battling and conquering nations in the first manifestation. The second manifestation is about doing good deeds to save people and princesses. And later on in the Middle Ages, sorry, in the 20th, in the early 19th century, we started seeing romance as the manifestation of love, romantic relationship, and domestic conflicts. And later, in the 20th century, we see popular romance as we know now in novels and in movies. All right, everyone, I think that's all for this first video. I hope you got to learn and enjoyed it. Bye.